More than half of all companies globally are family-owned or operated. Family businesses contribute 70% of the world's GDP and account for 65% of jobs. Their voices are important. Their stories must be told. Brought to you by the award-winning publication, Tharawat magazine. This is the Family Business Voice with your host, Ramya El-Agami.
BESTMALZ, a multi-generational story on the crest of new trends. BESTMALZ's 120-year track record of success is proof that tradition and innovation are not mutually exclusive. The traditional German family malt producer is at the forefront of a recent surge in global demand for modern bespoke beer experience. Since 2014, CEO Dr Axel Göhler, the grandson of founder Max Göhler, has spearheaded the company's international expansion. Today, the family business distributes quality malts to more than 85 countries, including the US, China, and Brazil. We sat down with Dr Göhler to discuss BESTMALZ's expansion, his unique perspective on the world of German family beer, and the modern concept of craft. Enjoy this episode with Dr Göhler. When you got the call to join the family business, if you've had a very exciting and international career before, also in the healthcare industry, so what finally pulled you into the family company?
When I did my PhD in St. Gall, I was working a lot on family business. And actually, the thesis that I wrote was research on family businesses in the brewing industry.
Okay.
And so I was always kind of involved in our own company.
Mm-hmm.
However, one of the learnings was, that too many cooks not necessarily make a better cake. And so I thought, that my older brother, he should be in charge. And he was also the one who was running it.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2007, we changed quite strongly the orientation of the company so that it became more of an international company. And
Mm-hmm.
since I had done a lot of work on the international, and having lived in the US, having lived in Switzerland, having spent
Mm-hmm.
a lot of time in international, I was working with BCG for 10 years. So I was
Mm-hmm.
working a lot on international assignments. And so we felt that this international background may be helpful for the company and the business. And it turned out that it was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But then not only that I became more involved with our business, but also my brother decided that he wanted to do something else. And so there was a handover 5 years ago from my older brother to myself.
Okay.
And this also meant that I had to give up what I had done before, because neither the consulate nor the business in my own company, we were more in project finance and a little bit investment banking,
Mm-hmm.
project finance. We were like a boutique business
Mm-hmm.
in Hamburg, but it didn't, just from the time and also the involvement that was needed in our own company here, it just
Mm-hmm.
didn't fit together.
So you, having studied, of course, as well, family businesses and their intricacies in your PhD in St. Gallen, you then, of course, also understand my next question, because it is, of course, actually quite an unusual situation for one family member to join and the other one to leave. I guess that avoids some of the potential friction that can happen when multiple family members are in the family business. But how did that play out for you, for the company itself? Like, did you feel like you changed a lot about the culture when you became sort of like the figurehead, I guess, of the business? Like, what kind of changes were implemented once you joined, and what was kept from what your brother had instituted?
The basic strategic orientation was done by my brother, which simply had to do with the fact that, the German brewing industry is not a growing industry. There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of consolidation. There's, especially with the mid-sized breweries, there's a lot of breweries going out of business. And overall, the consumption of beer in Germany is declining.
Really? Okay.
Having understood this, the company needed at least plan B to go in new areas. And at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, which was around 2005, the craft beer industry was coming up, which
Mm-hmm.
at that time seemed like an interesting alternative. However,
Mm-hmm.
what we didn't know back then was that the business from craft beer or craft malt, as opposed to the traditional
Mm-hmm.
malting business, is a completely different business. And this is, I think, something that my brother could not fully understand because he was too much in a startup phase, but which is now very, very evident because we have very different processes on the logistics side. We have a completely different financial risk scenario because we're now having 65% in the international business.
The next question that I think a lot of families sometimes tend to see as a trade-off is this idea of that maintaining tradition and innovating and expanding is somehow mutually exclusive or can be harmful one to the other. But it seems possible, at least from your example, that you can maintain your history and look back on it, maintain your identity, your traditional identity, but still move forward into other markets and sort of change strategic directions. How do you see this intersection between, as a family business, where to find that sweet spot between innovation and maintaining traditions that are important to your business and your identity?
In our industry, this answer is fairly easy because there is no contradiction between tradition and innovation. In order to explain this, traditionally producing malt means to produce malt very close to the natural process. So to the way how malting is done in nature. And that means it's done very gently. It's done with a lot of time. There are technical and chemical ways to speed up a lot of these processes. But if you want to retain the traditional way of developing grain into malt, which is then being used for beer, it just requires to stick to these rules and these traditions. Having said this, doesn't mean, of course, that on the logistics side, for instance, or on the IT supportive side, or on certain customer programs that we develop in order to be more supportive of what our brewers, our customers globally, what they want. I mean, there's a lot of room of innovation there.
You mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that beer consumption is actually on the decline, if I heard you correctly. And I was just wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about, of course, your customers are the breweries, but the breweries naturally are successful based on the demand for the end product, which is beer. Tell us more about what kind of trends you see here for the end beer consumer. Why do you think there's a decline? Is that regionally conditioned? Do you think, has your family seen these kinds of declines before? Is that a normal cyclical thing that happens to this kind of product? What do you expect the future will bring here in terms of preferences?
The decline is clearly visible in some of the markets which are traditionally more beer consuming markets. So if we distinguish between countries like Italy or France, which are more wine consumers as a whole, countries like Belgium or the UK or Germany would be more on the beer tradition. And in these beer markets, we do see more or less a decline in the overall beer consumption. So the per capita consumption is going down. Certainly in Germany, where some of the breweries are losing year by year, they're losing market share and overall volume. At the same time, and that's really the reason for this new craft beer initiative, which is a global initiative, people are looking for more identity in whatever they consume. So if they buy T-shirts, these T-shirts must reflect their own personality. If they buy shoes, they want running shoes which reflect their personality and their ambition and their lifestyle when they go running. And they're using these products as tools to show what they want to portray of themselves to the outside. And the same is true for beer.
And for you, because you clearly position yourself as a family business, the family ownership badge for you is clearly also a competitive advantage when it comes to exactly creating that kind of confidence. You consciously underline it?
Yes, definitely, because, identity is somehow linked with family. Because one of the complaints many companies have about these large conglomerates is that they are totally neutral. It's hard to have any continuity in the management because people change frequently. So obviously a family business where you see the same people again and again, whether it's at trade shows or at business meetings. I mean, this gives a lot of security and stability to some of the customers. And so, yeah, I think the family is certainly an advantage because it gives identity to a product.
So for you, it is a preference that BESTMALZ remain in the Göhler family hands. Is there a next generation that seems to be interested in coming on board for the business?
One of the things that I found out at my PhD work was that it's very, very crucial not to force anyone in a role that he cannot fill. If it works out, it's fine. But if it doesn't work out because the next generation is either not capable or not willing or not trained enough, then also one shouldn't force this, because this can really harm the mere existence of a company.
It is interesting for us, you having studied the subject as well, and you just gave a very important piece of advice. So not to insist or force the next generation into the business. Definitely sound advice, as we've seen over the many interviews we've done with family businesses around the world. It's almost always backfires. But if you had, based on your studies, but also based on you now being in your own family business, which I'm sure was also a surprising experience to a certain extent. It's always different to be at the helm oneself. What kind of advice do you have for the family businesses around you in your industry, but also beyond, when looking at everything that's happening in this 21st century and everything that's about to happen in quite a turbulent time, maybe in history, I would say, being part of this fourth industrial revolution? What kind of advice do you have for families that want to last for generations?
A couple of things. I think one important thing is that the family is close to the business, physically close to the business, especially with smaller businesses. I think it helps a lot when the children grow up close to the business, because otherwise the business becomes a money-making machine, but not necessarily a family business, because they don't see the features that makes this business attractive. So being close, physically close to the business, I think, is important, and being exposed to the business. Second thing I think is, don't communicate to the next generation that they are having fun. Next generation is not very likely to take up the task, because why should they? If they only hear about the problems and the things that don't work, why should they ruin their lives with starting things that are not joyful? So, of course, in a family situation, you're always exposed to your loved ones, which means it becomes kind of hard to not communicate authentically what's happening in the daily business, which is obviously not always fun. But if the parts that are clearly non-fun, people leaving the business, things not working out right, customers not paying their bills, if these things become too much of an issue, why should the next generation take over?
Of course.
Another very important thing is, I think, the senior management must understand when it's the right point to leave the business.
Yeah.
The time today with the social media and with mergers, with capital markets changing, I mean, there's so much change that I think it's more important than ever that the senior people have to understand now it's time to go, and let the next generation make their mistakes, but also let them run the business. Because it's a very tedious task to convince elderly managers about something which they can't understand, because it's just too much change. Something else which I find really important is that wealth management must be done in addition and separate from the business. If the business is the major source of wealth and the only source of wealth, it becomes, the whole issue of inheriting and finding compromises between 3 or 4 or 5 sons or daughters becomes really difficult. So I think family managers and family leaders have to think fairly early on in their lives. They have to think, how will I be able to split up my wealth in a fair way so that everyone is happy, even if he's not part of the family business?
Yeah.
Because if the family business is the only way to really get to the wealth, then everyone will want to be in the family business, even the ones who should not be. And finally, one last thing, I find it really important to have open dialogue, even though it's family. An open dialogue sometimes can be very brutal and not always friendly, but I think it's extremely important that one has an open and fair dialogue within the family about these issues. No, you may not be suited for the next generation in our business because you can't do this or you can't do that. And telling this to your sons and daughters may be very tough, but you just have to, because if there's unclear roles and too many compromises, these businesses will not be able to perform in the markets, because the markets don't care. I mean, they don't care about families. They want good products, and they want good solutions, and they want best for their money.
Yeah.
And so it's not easy. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. For the time being, it works out for us. And we'll see what the future brings.
Well, we'd like to think that after over 100 years, it's a little bit more than a coincidence that it's worked out for your family, and we look forward to seeing what is next for BESTMALZ. But first of all, thank you very much, Axel, for taking the time. We appreciate it. We must, from what we understand, must be a very busy schedule. So many thanks for sharing your insights with the Tharawat magazine readers. It's very much appreciated.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Family Business Voice. Subscribe to our channels now on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, or Spotify to be notified of our weekly episodes.